Okay, Tov. So now we start Masechta Horayos, which begins in the Mishnah Horu Bezdin Lavar Alachas Mikol Mitzvahs Amuras Batorah. Now, what we have to know is that the Bezdin ruled on a Iser Kares. That means something that if you violate B'mezid, you chayiv Kares, so it's a very severe Avera. And they mistakenly declared that something that's Asur and its chayiv kares is permitted. And if the majority of Klal Yisrael would have violated that Iser kares based on the ruling of the Bezdin, then there's a parsha called Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur. And there's an obligation incumbent upon the entire tzibur to bring that special chatos with its own unique dinim of hakrova. But the Mishnah is addressing a different case where it wasn't the majority of Klal Yisrael that violated the Isser, and therefore there's no chiyuv of karban helim dover shel tzibur. So an individual went ahead and based on the Horas Bezdin, he violated an Iser Kares. And then the Mishnah goes on to say that since he relied on Bezdin, that it issued a psak that he's allowed to eat this particular chelev, but really in truth, it's not, the hora was that it's not chelev, it's shumon, and you're allowed to eat it, but in truth, it's chelev. Then since he relied on the decision and the ruling of Bezdin, then he's potter from a karba, because shogig means a certain element of negligence because you didn't know something was prohibited or you didn't know that this was prohibited. But here in this case, he's totally guiltless. There's no element of negligence. He's relying totally on Bezdin, and therefore he's potter. And the Mishnah is going to point out that this is true in three different scenarios. Bein sha'asu the osiman, even if the members of the court themselves, the judges that sit on the court, they themselves ate that chelev, and then he, the individual, followed suit and ate that chelev. Bein sha'asu v'asachreim, or he was the first one to eat that chelev, and then they followed suit. Bein shalo asu v'asa, or in the third scenario, Charlie, could you close the door up, son? So that the Bezdin didn't get involved at all in eating that chelev. He was the only individual who ate that chelev, but in all these cases, he ate the chelev relying on the psak of Bezdin. Therefore, he's potter. They should tell it the Bezdin. He's not in any way doing anything that we could have said at that time was illegitimate. No, he was legitimately allowed to rely on the psak Bezdin. The Torah says, "V'asisa kachol sheyirucha," that you should follow the ruling of the Bezdin. Now, why does the Mishnah need these three scenarios, and in that order? Is this a case of lozu afsu, not only this, but even that? Or is it a case, on the contrary, of lo miboy, that it goes without saying, and so forth and so on? That we'll see in Mirza Shem in the Gemara. Now we continue in the Mishnah. Horu bezdin v'yoda echad mehem sheto. The case here is that the individual who ate the chelev was absolutely certain that the Bezdin had made a mistake in their hora, and that which he's eating now is really chelev and not shuman. Who is that person who is on the level to disagree with the Bezdin and establish that they made a mistake. O Talmud v'uroi lo ra. It could be Echad Mehem Sheto, meaning one of the members of the court, or it could be someone who is what we call a disciple. In modern Hebrew, we talk about doing staj. In other words, he's there watching the Bezdin. He's not officially part of the court, but he gets experience, and he got to the point in his scholarship that he's fit to sit on the court. Now, again, within that context, there are many different levels. You could have someone who has the knowledge and the ideas to sit on the court, but he doesn't have that experience, and he doesn't have the ability to make an analogy from the case that he heard of an explicit ruling to another case which was not ruled by the Bezdin. Or the contrary might be true. He really knows how to make analogies and to analyze the rulings of Bezdin so that he can extrapolate and apply them elsewhere, but he doesn't have the knowledge to sit on the court. And all these cases will be addressed. But in principle, if he is worthy of sitting on the court, or he is sitting on the court, and he knows with certainty that Bezdin is issuing a false, erroneous ruling, then he should have followed his own knowledge, not relied on the Bezdin. And therefore, in this case, he's chayev. He has to bring a karma chatos, like anyone who eats chalev thinking it's nevela, or eats chalev thinking the Torah allows you to eat chalev. And once again, we're going to go through the various scenarios, the three possibilities. Bein sha'asu v'yosei mohem, whether or not the Bezdin set the precedence by going ahead and eating this chalev, and then he followed suit. Bein sha'asu v'yosei achreihem, or whether he took the initiative and he was the first one to eat the chalev, and then they followed suit, and the members of the court likewise ate the chalev. Bein shelo asa v'hu asa, or in the third scenario, they didn't violate this, only he violated it. Harei chayv, in all these cases that he knew, and he had the scholarship level to determine that Bezdin was erring, and it was an erroneous decision, and he went ahead and followed Bezdin. In all these cases, he's chayav achatos. Why? Says the Mishnah, they shall otola bebezdin. It wasn't the ruling of Bezdin that caused him to eat the chalev. He ate the chalev knowing full well that Bezdin was mistaken in their ruling. So in that sense, he took upon himself that responsibility, and he needs a kapara. He has to bring a korban. Klal. Now the Mishnah gives us a klal at the end, and once again, whenever there's a klal at the end of the Mishnah, you have to know what it's coming to include. So if the cause of his eating chalev was Bezdin, and he relied on Bezdin, then he's potter. In the Gemara, we're going to see that that's a gigantic controversy, but our Mishnah here reflects that opinion in the Tanoim, that as long as he's relying on Bezdin, then we remove any level of negligence and responsibility from his shoulders, and therefore he is potter. However, if he knows that Bezdin is mistaken, then he can't say, well, I relied on Bezdin. And therefore there's an element of guilt here, maybe not a total guilt of a mezid, but at least of a shogeg, that generates a chiv chatos, and he's chayav chatos. Omar Shmuel, the Gemara is now going to talk about this concept of par helim dover shel tzibur. Liolam ein bezdin chayovim ad sheyomru lahem mutarim atem. Okay, so there are two ways in which Bezdin could formulate verbally their ruling. one way is for them to say that the halacha is that it's mutter. The other way is to say mutarim atem. In other words, we have this category of a foodstuff. We don't know if it's chelev and it's kares or it's not. So what was Bezdin's ruling? So if Bezdin said I'll go very extreme, I'll say in a theoretical sense, this is what the halacha is, then in that case, they're not chayav a carbon helim dover shel tzibur. When are they chayav helim dover tzibur? When they say the words mutarim atem, meaning there was an actual case that came up. They weren't just saying in luftarein, in the air, this is what the halacha is and it's mutar, but rather mutarim atem, you can go ahead and eat it. It's kind of like halacha l'maisa. Then, if the majority of the Jewish assembly violated that Easter based on the erroneous court ruling, then the court has to bring a parahelim dover shel tzibur. Rav Dimin Adoi Omar Achiyom lehem mutar matem lasos. Even if they said mutar matem, that's not sufficient. They have to add the word lasos, which, as I said before, means halacha l'maisa. My taimo lefishlo nigmara hora. The machayev of parahelim dover shel tzibur is what I call a chal shem hora, meaning a halachic entity called hora. And according to Rav Dimi, the precondition for that entity, that legal entity called a hora, a ruling, is when they add the word lasos. So without the word lasos, even they said mutarim lachem, the hora is incomplete. It doesn't have a chal shem hora that would generate a chiyuv carbon paralim dover shel tzibur. Abaye, and Abaye in this case is coming to support Rav Dimi, Afanana mitnina, and we also learned this in a Mishnah, Sanhedrin Daf Pei Vav, Chazar le'iro. Okay, now the Mishnah in Sanhedrin appears in a perek called Ben Sora Morer in Sanhedrin. That's where the issue of a Zoken Mamre comes up, which we read about last Shabbos, and that is where the Zoken is the dissenting view in Yerushalayim and the Har on the Har Bayis in the Lishkas HaGozis, where he disagrees with the Sanhedrin about a ruling, and he refuses to accept the majority view of the Bezdin. Then he goes back to his city, and based on his own understanding, as the dissenting view, he gives a ruling. He'll only become chayav as a zaken mamre if chazal leiru shonav limed b'derech limud poter hora lasos chayav. If he actually gives a hora, he tells them in a certain particular case, go ahead and do this. But if, on the other hand, shonav limed, if he just gets up and he darshans and he teaches and he imparts and transmits the Torah the way he thinks the Torah should be transmitted, that's not a zaken mamre. It's got to be hora lasos. So we have two parshios now, both of which have or are generated by and dependent upon the chal shem hora. There's the parsha parhelim dover shel tzibur, depends upon horas bezdin, and the parsha of zaken mamre depends upon horas hazaken when he goes back to his city. And in both cases, the definition halachically of hora requires lasos. Amar Rabbi Abba, Afanana mitnin. I also would like to support this view of Rav Dimi from a Mishnah in Yevamos. Now, the analogy of Rabbi Abba is a bit of a stretch. It's not as crystal clear as the one that we had just now from Abaye. And what does it say in the Mishnah Yevamos? There was an issue about a married woman as to whether her husband is still alive. And based on the evidence that the court gathered together, they came to the conclusion that her husband is dead. They now have to give a hurrah for her that would allow her to get remarried. And then nafkamina would be if, let's say, we find out later on that the evidence was mistaken and really the husband's still alive. She, in the meantime, based on the original decision of Bezdin, went ahead and had a relationship with another man, whether she's guilty for that. So the Mishnah establishes that Horayos Bezdin li naseh, if Bezdin gave her a horah, not that she could go ahead and have a relationship, an extramarital relationship with any man that comes along, but rather that she's allowed to get married, Vikilkel, and she went ahead and had an extramarital relationship, then chayavis b'karban, she has to bring a karban. Because it turned out that her husband was really, truly alive and that she had a bias shesish. Shalohi tirula el linase. Again, what Rav Abba is trying to point out is like similar to Rav Dimi, but not exactly the same, but that we have to analyze the words of the horah. In this case, there was a horah that allowed her to get remarried, but there was no horah allowing her to have a relationship with another man. And therefore she, by having a relationship with another man without marriage, has not relied on the horah's bezdin. If she's outside the purview of the horah's bezdin, then she has to bring a car. Amar Avina, Afanan Tanemi. I also want to support Rav Dimi from a Mishnah in Horayos. It says, Horu bezdin lavor al achat. Right, this is our Mishnah. Al achas mikol mitzvah muris b'torah. So if you read the Mishnah carefully, the Mishnah says Horu bezdin lavar. The extra word lavar means that the bezdin gave a horah ruling lemaisa. Go ahead and eat that. Shall I call it chalev? In truth, it is chalev, but they thought it was not chalev. Sulamidi. Sulamidi is the way the Gemara closes this whole section by saying, for now, this is reliable totally. The only time there's a Chal Shem Horah, whether it mean to be Mechayev Parsh Dover Shalom Tzibur, whether it mean to be Mechayev the Zokim Mamre, whether it mean to pater up a woman from an Eishes that her husband is alive from a Karban Chatos. In all cases, Horah requires lasos. And that's the end of the story, finito. Ika Diamri, this is the Lishna of Basra. Omar Shmuel, Ein Bezdin Chayovim, Ad Sheyomru Lahem Mutar Vatem Lasos. Very good. So Shmuel reflects here in the Lishna of Basra exactly what we said until now. But Rav Dimi, Minadoi Omar Afilu Mutar Vatem Nigmar Horah. Even if the formulation and the, shall we call it, the words that came out of the mouth of Bezdin was mutarim atem, and they did not add the word lasos, nevertheless, nigmara horah, it's considered a chal shem horah, complete horah, and therefore, if most of the people of Israel relied on that horah, then there's a chiyuv parahelim dov shel tzibus. According to this girsa, in the second Lishna, Rav Dimi Minardoi disagrees. He doesn't require lasos. but mutar matem is enough. Mutar matem constitutes and qualifies as a hora to be mechayev a carbon par helim dover shel tzibur. Now, according to the second Lishna, presenting Rav Dimi min Arda as dropping the requirement of lasos and validating the Chal Shem Hora based on Mutar Matem, then all the Mishnayos that have been quoted until now become now difficult. Omar Abayva lo tnan hachi. It says Chazaliv l'shano limav derech shon poter and Hora lasos chayev. So what are you, Rav Dimi, going to do with this Mishnah in Sanhedrin regarding a Zakim Mami that he's only chayev if he says lasos? Omar Rabbi Abba. Now we go with Rabbi Abba's proof to the first Lishna, which now becomes a challenge to the second Lishna of Rav Dimi. Holo tnan hachi horu lo bezdin li nase holcha v'kilkala chayeves b'karban shlo itiru lo el li nase. That we're very meticulous in analyzing the language, the formulation of the horas bezdin, and if the bezdin was more to allow her to get married, but no permissibility was offered to her to have a relationship outside of the framework of marriage, then she's chayav. If her husband's still alive, she's chayav a karma. So we see that we need hora lasas. Amar Rava Harlo Tanan Horu Bezdin Lavar Alachas Mikol Mitzvah Torah, and therefore the Gemara says Sulo Midi. Forget about the Lishna Basra of Rav Dimi. Such a shita cannot be justified, cannot be reconciled with all the Mishnayos, and therefore we're of the opinion that a hora requires lasas. Now we go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Holach hayochid v'osa shogeg al pihem. So now we start the main sugya for today. The Gemara is analyzing the word shogeg here, which apparently, at first glance, is totally superfluous. Nisnevi asal piyah. Drop the word shogeg. And why did the Mishnah have to add this extra extraneous word shogeg? It could just said that holach hayochid vi asal piyah. The yochid went ahead and he based himself on the ruling of Bezdin, and he went ahead and he ate the chalev. Shogeg lamali. Why do you have to add the word shogeg? Amar Rava. So it's very interesting, like just how we analyze the Torah itself, that it has an extra word, that we build tili tilim of halachas on an extra word. Even in a Mishnah, we could dash in an extra word in the Mishnah. Lasuye, this is Rava's opinion, horu bezdin shechelev muter, v'nischalif lo chelev b'shum v'yachalo, potu. So in order to understand Rava, the key words here are nischaliflo, etc. There was a mistaken, erroneous horas bezdin to be matir something that's asur, but that's not what caused this particular individual to eat the chalev. He actually wanted to eat X, that piece of fat, and inadvertently he ate Y. Now, the piece of chalev that he actually ate was subject to the horas bezdin betos, that it's mutter, but he ate it only because he mistakenly ate it. So then the Mishnah is telling me that even in this case of shogeg, he's potter. So al piyam doesn't mean that he ate the chaylev because of their ruling. He ate the chaylev for a different reason entirely. He made a mistake and he thought that this was that and that was this, and he thought it was shuman. But the action that he did was equal to the heter of Bezdin. And you and I would have said logically that in this case he's chayav, because his eating of chaylev had nothing to do with Bezdin. Torah's Bezdin is not responsible for his eating that piece of chaylev. So the Mishnah, by adding the word shogeg and establishing that you're patur, is telling us that even in this case, which from one perspective, meaning from the perspective of the person who violated the Isur Chaylev and ate the Chaylev, it's really shogeg. It's a classical shogeg. There were two pieces in front of him, and he meant to eat this piece, but for some reason he picked up the other piece, which is Chaylev instead of the Shuman, and it's shogeg. And nevertheless, al piyam mamish. So wait a minute, just 1 second here. So again, the Mishnah is telling you lasuye horabezdin and mutov and ischalif lo chaylev b'shuman v'yachlo. One second, what's al piyam mamish? Just give me a second, sorry. Oh, I see. In other words, again, in darshaning the words of the Mishnah, Rav is saying that there are two different cases that are indicated respectively by two different, either a word or a phrase in the Mishnah. The simple case in which he's patur, because he relied on the erroneous ruling of the Mishnah, is al piyam. But the Mishnah also adds the word shogeg to al piyam, even though we don't need the word shogeg, to teach me a gavaldige chiddush, that even though it wasn't al piyam, meaning it wasn't that he ate the chaylev because they told him he's allowed to eat the chaylev. He ate the chaylev because he mistook it for another piece. He thought it was the shuman that he was taking, and it turned out to be the chaylev. And even in that case, since had he known that it was chaylev, he would have eaten it anyway because he would have relied on the mistaken psak of Bezdin, therefore he's put. Ika Diamri, another transmission, another lishna. Amar Rava shogig al piyam hu de patur av nischalif lo chaylev b'shum v'yachalo chayev. So according to this lishna Basra, Rava indeed holds that it's got to be shogig al piyam, and the reason why he ate that chaylev and he's patur is because of the horah that Bezdin ruled that he's allowed to eat that chaylev. But if, on the other hand, regardless of the horah, and maybe he doesn't even know about the horah, he simply ate chaylev inadvertently by mistakenly, switching one piece with another, then he's chayav, because that's not al pihem. So then the word shogeg, according to Lishna Bas of Rav, is only an introduction to al pihem, and al pihem comes to limit the shogeg. He's only a shogeg l'chayev if it was his own decision, his own mistake, but not if it's al piyah. The Gemara says, Milsa de Pshita Leila Rava, Kami Boy Leila Rami Bar Chama. Now, again, what does it mean, Milsa de Pshita Leila Rava? It could go in two different directions, depending upon whether you have the Lishna Kama or the Lishna Basa. In the Lishna Kama, Pshita Leila Rava means that even though he did not eat the chalev because of the ruling of Bezdin, nevertheless, he's potur, or Pshita Leila Rava could mean in the Lishna Basra that for sure he's chayav if it was his mistake and he wasn't relying on Bezdin. But Rabbi Bar Chama in this very case vacillated back and forth. The boy Rami Bar Chama horu Bezdin shechelev mutter v'nischalev l'shum shumim mal, and therefore Rami Bar Chama left it as an open-ended question, and Rava came to try to resolve that question of Rami Bar Chama. Omar Rava, Toshma. Let's see if we can learn our Mishnah and be medaik one way or the other. Halach yochid v'yasa shogeg al piem. And again, the Mishnah adds the word shogeg, which is lechora superfluous. Shogeg al piem lomale. Why do you have to say both shogeg and al piem? Lav lasuye horu bezin shechelev mutam v'nischalef lo chelev b'shul v'yacholo pot. So even in this case, he's potter, even though he ate this chalev based on his own error, not on the erroneous ruling of Bezdin, but nevertheless, since the fact that theoretically, even if he would have identified it as chalev, he would have eaten it because he would have relied on the Bezdin. That's enough to pater him up. And Rami Bar Chama is not satisfied with this. Dilma shogeg al piyam u'de potter aval neschayef lo chalev v'shuva v'yachlo chayv. Maybe the al piyam is a qualification of the shogeg, and when is he potter? If it's only al piyam, it's only that he was a shogeg because of the ruling of Bezdin. But if he was shogeg on his own initiative because he switched this piece with another piece, then enochinami he'd be chay. Ike diamri. Another version is Omar Rava Toshma Holach Yochid V'Yosa Shogeg Al Piyam. My love Shogeg Al Piyam Ude Potur Avon Eschayef Lo Chelev B'Shuma Chol Chayev. And the Gemara rejects it. Dilma O Shogeg O Al Pi. Now the Gemara wants to suggest that Rav and Rabbi Yochanan had a debate about this very issue. Beplugta, and Rabbi Bar Chama and Rava in their dialogue were really preceded by the following. Horu bezdin shechelev mutiv eschalef lo chelev v'shuma v'yacholo Rav HaMapot Rabbi Yochanan Mechai. Meisvei. So now the Gemara is going to confront Rabbi Yochanan and quote a brisa that seems to contradict Rabbi Yochanan, who says that you're chayiv in this case. Again, repeating why you chayiv according to Rabbi Yochanan, because it was not the Horayos Bezdin that he was relying on. It was a classic shogeg. And the brisa says, okay, so let's read the whole pasuk and then we'll see the brisa. The pasuk is in Vayikra Perek Daled, and it says, "V'im nefesh achas techeta b'shgaga me'ama oretz ba'asosa achas mitzvos Hashem shalot te'aseh v'yashem o hoda elov chatosa shechot v'hevi karbana." So this is the parsha of Chiyuv Chatos, in a classic case of a yachid, an individual who violated a Chiyuv Karis b'shogeg. And the Torah added the words Me'am ha'oretz ba'asosa. So what does this come to teach us? Says the Brisa, Prat lemumar. as if to say that me'ama oretz means a member of the community, but a mumar who is a renegade against all the laws of the Torah, he's not part of the community, and therefore he's not included in this chiyuv. Rav Shimon ben Yossi Mishum Rabbi Shimon, and so I don't need a pasuk to exclude mumar. Why? Because Hareyu Omer, the Torah says, Asher lo te'asena b'shgaga v'yashet. If he sins a sin which becomes known to him, so why did the Torah add O Hoda? O Hoda meaning it became known to him. Meaning the idea that he got at the end that, oh no, you ate chalev mistakenly, that is meaningful for him. Hashav mi yidiyasa maybe carbon al shigasa, lo shav mi yidiyasa, maybe carbon al yidiyasa. If Asher Hoda, once he finds out that he ate chalev inadvertently, oh no, from now on he's going to be more careful and so forth and so on. That's called shav. Shav means he changes his ways, be yidiyasa because of his yidiyah. But a mumar is not shav mi yidiyasa, he's not included therefore in O Hoda Elov, and therefore he's parted from a karbachatos. Now, I said parted from a karbachatos, but I should have used a slightly different language. He doesn't have the privilege of a karbachatos. So how is this a challenge on Rabbi Yochanan? V'im Isa, for Rabbi Yochanan, you're correct. That if a person inadvertently made a switch between this chalev and this shuman and so forth, and he ended up mistakenly eating the chalev, and according to you, Rabbi Yochanan, even though Bezdin paskin that he's allowed to eat this chalev, erroneously, they made that mistake, he's chayiv to bring a carbon chatos, holo shav miyidiyasahu. You can't classify him as shav miyidiyasa, Rabbi Yochanan, because even if you told him now, hey, what you ate is chalev, he still would have eaten it based on the ruling of Bezdin. And now the Gemara is going to try to defend Rabbi Yochanan, Amar of Papa, Kasav Rabbi Yochanan, Kevan, Dechi, Misyada, Lahu, Lebeidina, Hadabahu, Hu Nami Hadabahu, Shavmi, the Asakarina lay, and therefore he's chayiv. Wow. Rav Papa comes up with what I call a first-class lumdus, a conceptual breakthrough. It is Shav Miyadiyasa. Again, he himself wouldn't have been Shav Miyadiyasa because he thinks that Bezdin ruled that he's allowed to eat it. But it's Shav Miyadiyasa because if Bezdin finds out that they paskined and they permitted this chalev erroneously, they will be Shav Miyadiyasa. It's considered as if he were Shav Miyadiyasa. Amar Rava, Moder Rav, She'eno Mishalim L'Rov Tzibur. Rav is saying that this person who made a mistake between chalev and shuman and ate the chalev inadvertently is a shogeg. But he's a shogeg that's potter from a carbon. And why is that? Because Bezdin ruled that he's erroneously that he's allowed to eat that piece of chalev. Says Rava, but when we calculate the majority of Israel, that based on the ruling of Bezdin, they violated Isur Kares, and therefore there's a chiyuv of carbon par helim davashal tzibur, that doesn't apply. Meaning, we cannot calculate this individual and incorporate him into the majority. He doesn't make up one of the majority. Like, as if to say, if let's say you had 100, he cannot be number 51. And why is that? Because when he ate the chelev, it wasn't because of Bezdin. And in order to set up a par helim tzibur, it's got to be that the majority of the people violated the Isur because of, and they relied on the ruling of Bezdin. My timer, how does Rava know this? Amar kra bishgaga. And what does bishgaga mean? Ad shiyu kulam bishgaga. It's got to be one shgaga in which all of this majority of the people relied on Bezdin, and he's not one of them because he ate the chayla for a different reason, not because of Bezdin. The Mishnah says, Bein sha'asu v'asa imahem. By the way, I have to tell you, Steve, I calculated that this first Amud, in the edition of the Gemara that I have, this Amud Beis, meaning Daf Beis, Amud Alpha Beis, is 20 pages. So again, at 10:30, you're free to go wherever you have to go. But I don't think there's any way under heaven that you could do a decent job on 20 pages in an hour. Anyway, it's beyond my human capability. So the Mishnah says, Bein sha'asu v'asa imahem. And the Mishnah gives three scenarios in which the Bezdin did or did not eat that chelev. Either they ate the chelev after he ate the chelev, or he ate the chelev first and he ate the chelev after they ate the chelev, or they didn't eat the chelev at all. And in all cases, he's potter. So the Gemara asks, Lama leila misli kol hani. Let's analyze these three scenarios and see if we're justified in the Mishnah's understanding of adding each one of these three cases. Bishlei Maresha, I understand the first case where the Mishnah says that he's potur, right? The Mishnah is broken down into the Reisha and the Seif. In the Reisha, he's potur in these three cases, and the Seif, he's going to be chayiv in these three cases. So let's go through the Reisha first. Lo zu afzu katani. We go from the lower chiddush to the greater chiddush. And the greater chiddush is that he's potur even though no member of Bezdin ate that chelev. He can't claim, well, I'm holding on to the coattails of the judges themselves that ate the chelev because they didn't eat the chelev. So that's the biggest chiddush. And then the style of the Mishnah is called lo zu afzu, not only in this case, but even in this case. Ella seifa de l'chayve. But what happens in the case of the seifa, where the Mishnah says that he's chayav? And let's go over it one more time, because this is the first time we're learning Horayos. Why in the seifa is he chayav? Because in the Sefer, he himself knew that Bezdin was erroneous. Is then Frekta Gemara Ibchami Boile. The sequence of the Mishnah should have been Pugfakert, should have been in the reverse.